Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week on Ameritocracy, I had the honor to speak with Suzanne Mann Coppel, a Holocaust survivor who spent her childhood as a Jewish refugee in Western Europe. Suzanne recounts her family's remarkable journey of determination as they faced adversity and unimaginable circumstances in their fight to survive. Suzanne discusses the Holocaust in three parts. She starts in 1935 as Jews began experiencing marked local discrimination and physical displacement. Next, from 1940 to the end of the war in 1945, she discusses her experience as one of 200,000 refugees and the genocide that killed over 6 million Jews, including close members of her family. Lastly, after the war came to an end in 1949, 16-year-old Suzanne said goodbye to her family in France and embarked across the Atlantic to New York in search of a new beginning. In America, she was able to continue her education and build her dream of a different life. Now, 90 years old, she offers her perspective on current events as I ask her whether she feels history could be repeating itself. Suzanne left us with a very strong charge. She said, speaking of America, take care of her, pay attention, stay engaged, and vote. I hope you enjoy. Alrighty, we're here today with Suzanne Mann Coppel. I'm so excited to be here and to be in your home today. Thank you, Suzanne.
Very welcome.
Yeah, it's very nice to see you. I followed a couple different times where you have told your story and put your story out there. It's very compelling. And I think for my show, what I was really hoping to be able to talk about was a little bit of overcoming adversity. A lot of the information and the stories that you've talked about the Holocaust and being a Holocaust survivor, very inspiring. And I just wanted to thank you again for being on the show.
You're welcome. I actually wrote the story for my children. I hadn't spoken about it before.
It was interesting doing some of the research to get ready to have this discussion. You know, we have a lot of different topics on our show, but, you know, this is such an important story. I just wanted to make sure, just very respectfully, that I did my homework, and I really learned more than I thought I knew a lot. And then as I started to go through your story and then see and put it in context to history, it was just very interesting. And what I'd like to do is give the listeners a little bit of an orientation. You know, your story, you know, obviously starting at your birth and takes into about 1935, historically, a lot of stuff starting to change in Germany and across Western Europe for Jewish folks, but definitely in Germany. And, you know, at that point, Germany is kind of overcoming post-World War I. And, you know, the perspective there for the German people was that Reconstruction for World War I was really a tough time period because, you know, there was a lot of provisions made to kind of, you know, get Western Europe reconstructed. And so created a little bit of a vacuum and a void. And, you know, and then so as in 1933, Adolf Hitler starts moving into power, in 35, things really start changing in Germany. And so what I thought might be helpful is if you could pick up the story there and talk about where you were born and take us up through your story.
Well, I was born in Manheim, Germany in 1933. And my father was manager of a shoe factory. And by 1935, he saw the writing on the wall. And what I want to mention is that Germany was, whenever there is a financial downturn in a country, they have to blame somebody. So I guess the Jews were blamed. And so in 1935, we were thrown out of our apartment. We had problems finding other lodgings. We finally did. And then my father acquired a position in Holland, Amsterdam. And we went through Italy and took a plane to Amsterdam. And when we arrived there, they wouldn't let us in because our passport had a J on it. Mm. Going back to Germany was impossible. From Germany, we went to Milan, Italy, and where my father started a business with a friend. This was in 1935. And when Mussolini came to power and hooked up with Hitler, all foreign Jews were asked to leave Italy. So that's when we went to Holland. And we've spent a night at the airport in Holland under watch. And I think I mentioned that I wanted to the next morning, I wanted to see a plane take off. So my father sat me on a radiator, which was piping hot. And my derrière was burned. Mm. And that was very painful. Well, anyway, we took a plane, and we're going back to Milan, but a doctor on the plane who was from Vienna saw my plight. I couldn't sit still. Everything was sticking. And he gave me some medication, and he advised my dad, don't go back to Italy, stop in Paris. So we flew to Paris, where we stayed for about 3 weeks, got a green card. And in 1939, 1940, my father joined the French army. My mother and I were in Caen, in a hotel where she was employed as a waitress. So she explained to me, first, the Nazis invaded that city. I watched them come down in a parachute. Mm-hmm. And my mother, and pretty soon they were in the hotel taking over. So my mother said, if a soldier stops you and talks to you in German, pretend you don't know. So I was on my way to a restroom when a soldier did come down the stairs, and he asked me, "Wie heißt du?" which means, "What is your name?" And I answered him, "Je ne comprends pas." And he kept asking me, and then he did mention that I reminded him of his little girl from Germany.
So you used French to kind of throw the perspective that you were actually a French young girl.
I kept saying, "Je ne comprends pas."
Yep. Wow.
And he kept asking, and I just didn't waver. Mm-hmm. And when the armistice was signed, my father came home, but then we were going to the southwestern part of France. The Vichy government hadn't been in power yet. So we went into hiding in a farm not too far away where tobacco was hanging. So we slept on straw, and as I said, rats and mice were our companion. And we then walked to a village called Castelmoron-sur-Lot in the southwestern part of France, in the Bordeaux area. And
can I ask you a question there? So when you were in northern France at that point and
Yeah.
you started walking,
Yes.
doing the research, it's about 100 miles south to where you ended up.
Well,
how did you walk? Or
we didn't walk the 100 miles. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Perhaps we drove, but
yeah,
that's escaping me. I
Right.
don't remember. And from then on, there was a belt factory. So my parents got a job doing piecework in the belt factory. And so the owners of that factory said, well, since your daughter can't practice her religion, why don't you send her to church? Which I did every Sunday. I went to church. Pretty soon, my father and mother left because they must have heard that something was going to happen. And they left me with the family. I think the ones that owned the factory also owned the hotel in the village. They left me with them. I had no idea when if I would see them again or when. After a few months, they did come back. And after the armistice was signed in France, and the Vichy, in 1940, the Vichy government came into power in Marseille, in southern France. And they were friends of the Germans. The head of this government was called Maréchal Pétain, which had fought in the First World War against the German. But now he figured, well, the Germans are going to win this war, might as well be on their side. And my father joined the French underground. And my mother and I were left in that village, and the captain of the gendarme, of the police, was very sympathetic to us. So sometimes he warned us, we have to come and look for you in your house and arrest you tonight. And my father had been home when they warned, and the window in our bedroom led to a neighbor's backyard. And he kept his bicycle there. So he jumped out the window, went and left. And my mother and I were left. They looked under the bed. They made, they just looked, did what they thought they had to do, and left.
wow.
Well, sometime later, my father was home, and they warned us that they had to come and arrest him and send him away. Well, my mother, I was 9 years old. My mother was pregnant because there was a rumor going around that the Vichy government or the Germans were not taking the women the Jewish who were pregnant. That was completely untrue. So my mother at that time was 2 months pregnant, and when they took my father, was in the street, and they told my mother, if you get a letter from the city doctor mentioning that you're 5 months pregnant, we may be able to do something. Well, they made my father take his belt off. And when I asked why, well, so he wouldn't hang himself. They took him away, and that was the most terrible thing. It's been 75, 80 years, and it still bothers me. After about 5 days, he came back. Went back in the woods to fight. And my mother, I went to school, to a girls' school, and there was a boys' school. The city was mainly Catholic, and boys and girls were separate. And sometimes when I came home, I saw my mother with the baby carriage. My sister was born in 1943, a terrible year. And she said, we have to go and hide. So we would walk to a farm, be there, work the fields, pick tobacco, pick tomatoes. I would watch the cows, and my sister by that time was a baby, and the doors were left open. And I remember the pigs and the chickens and the ducks, they were in and out of the farmhouse. And my sister and I were full of lice.
Oh.
And there was a pump outside, no indoor plumbing whatsoever. So there was a pump outside. In the mornings, I went to the pump, washed my face. There was no brush, nothing to brush my teeth with. And once a week, there was a galvanized tub, and my mother heated the water in the fireplace, and that was a bath.
Wow.
So this went on. I would miss months of school because of hiding. And when I went back, I was, of course, way back in my learning, and the teacher wasn't too fond of me. I was lucky she didn't turn me in. And so we were haunted until the end of the war, 1945, when my father got a discharge from the army. He was a lieutenant, and he was made a tax collector in the Czar, which is a small country between France and Germany. At that time, it went back to France after the war. And
So what year was that about?
1945, 46.
So during the liberation.
And he was highly decorated.
Right.
By Grandval, which was de Gaulle's colonel, and he got all kinds of decorations. I have to remember Medal of Honor. And all kinds of decoration.
So when you guys found out about the war being over, did you believe it was real, or
Yeah, I remember being in town and there was a dance, and my mother and I were dancing. We heard the Americans had landed, and the Germans were running, so it's...
So you knew it was...
Yeah, we could relax. At that time, my father would come home. He had stuff, he had things that the American Army gave, like toothbrushes and soap and all kinds of things. And so we moved to the Czar. And then my father was with the police force.
Right. So at this point, Suzanne, just to claim some ground.
Yeah.
So for 5 years, you've been living as a refugee. And, during that period, they defined the Holocaust, kind of two different paths, the genocide part where there was concentration camps and the refugees. And, when you look at the refugee path, they estimate at least 200,000 people lived in the way that you did, and 6 million people went through the genocide. And so, kind of having to go from place to place, and every day you're just wondering what's going to happen. At the end of the war, just to kind of put some data points out there, historically, 1945 to 48, it's the war's over. So it's kind of the post war period, or the reconstruction after that war. And it seemed at that point from history that even across Western Europe, it wasn't totally free flow. The immigration policies were still tight. So a lot of Jewish folks went back to Germany or they went and established in 1948. Israel was formed.
There was never anything said about Israel. The only thing my father told me is that he had relatives, cousins in New York, that they already had to provide affidavits for their close family.
To get them over.
Yeah. And he started a shoe business in the Tsar. He had a partner. The partner had the money, and my dad had the knowledge. And we were there for several years. But when the Tsar country, when it went back to Germany, my parents left, didn't want to stay there anymore.
Is that when you went to Strasbourg?
I never lived in Strasbourg. I went to America from the Tsar. I became very ill at the age of 15. I had paratyphoid fever and hepatitis. And when I got over that in 1949, I was sick and tired of Europe by then. And my parents said, okay, we'll send you to America for 2 years. And in 2 years, you learn the language, go to school, and you'll come back. But I met Werner, my husband, who immigrated. He and his family immigrated in 1935. His father owned a butcher shop in Germany, Bingen, on the Rhine. And when this all started with Hitler, the people wouldn't shop in his butcher shop anymore. So that's when they decided to leave. And my mother-in-law's siblings called her crazy for leaving, but she was a smart one.
Yeah, Suzanne, it's interesting.
Yeah.
My wife is Iranian, and so Iran. She was a Christian in Iran, and at that point the Shah was still in power through the 70s, and there was a point where it looked like it was unstable in Iran, and a lot of people left. And then a lot of people, including my wife and her father, stayed in Iran. And then basically the Shah was overthrown, and they still stayed. And so there was a very similar paths, except there was no genocide. But there was people that got the signs early, like Werner's family, like in 1935, said,
Right.
"We're out of here." And then maybe on your family, it's like, you know what? I still think we could piece this together
Right.
as refugees, and we'll just get to a safe place. Kind of fast forward to 49, you're like, "Hey, look, I'm done. I'm out of here." But it kind of is an observation, and I got a question here: is that even today, as I go with my wife's family who are Assyrian, and a lot of the people in her family Assyrians and Armenian, but the Assyrian folks from Iran, and I'll go to events and the men will get together and we'll talk, and a lot of times they're in Farsi, but I don't understand, so they'll talk in English, and we're sitting at the table, the men are having drinks and talking. And in the last 2 or 3 years, with all the craziness going on in America, a lot of times you'll hear discussions like America is starting to feel like that was at that demarcation point where at some point, like whether in our story right now, 1935, where maybe I should leave Germany, or no, I'm just going to it's going to be okay. They had that same dilemma in the late 70s or mid 70s of like, hey, should we just stay in Iran or leave? And there was a point when you couldn't leave. And these men who have kind of seen this before are starting to talk like America's starting to feel like that. And I think that was the first time it's like they actually have the credential because they've lived through something like that. And, on your side, your family stuck it out and was refugee. Luckily didn't, some parts of your family did feel the genocide part. We could talk a little bit.
All our extended family perished in the camps. My both grandparents, uncles, my father's had a sibling, a sister, her husband, and 2 young boys.
Wow.
Some went to Auschwitz, the others to Dachau.
Wow. Yeah. And I think the hard part of the question too is that like when you start seeing, activity and I'll just call a little bit of the polarization of our nation, and you start seeing that. I'm a guy that looks at the glass half full, and part of the reason for doing this podcast is that I still see all the great things of America, and I want to take stories like yours and remind people of what adversity really looks like at the throw of it. But I also talk to people like the Assyrian men that I've sometimes talked to. When they start saying stuff like that, it's like you always do question yourself just intelligently. It's like, hey, is it really that bad? Or maybe it's just there's so much media because of the internet that maybe we amplify stuff to a level that, it's maybe we over amplify it and it's not, quote, really that bad. And I guess I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, current events, today, I tell Gary this, your son, is the one thing. You're qualified. You're like a mariner on the sea. You've sailed the seas. If clouds start building up on one side and you start looking and go, hey, there's a storm coming. I better get out of this area or it's going to be really bad. You have that same view of the world. And so I'm just curious, without trying to get into a point of any politics or anything, but when you look at current events, what type of current events do you follow? And what with your viewpoint now and your context, like we're talking about today, anything that you're concerned about that you see?
Well, you see the glass half full. I see the glass half empty, unfortunately. America is the best country in the whole world. Even if anti-Semitism is on the rise again. And I hope we don't go through this again. My father always said history repeats itself. Well, I hope not. But my parents, as they became elderly, Werner and I, my husband and I, would go to Europe twice a year, sometimes 3 times. And we were, every time we landed in at LAX, we, I could kiss the ground. So that's my view. Unfortunately, we're in an economic downturn now here since the pandemic, etc. And I hope everything works out.
Yeah, it definitely, it sounds like, but be cautious is what I think your perspective is like, and I could see what you're saying with, the synagogue shootings and stuff like that. It's hard to see if that's.
And we have guards during the high holy days at our temple. And it's too bad, but I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look and you out of all this stuff that you've seen, and like you said, America is the greatest place ever. As far as a place that's just provided tremendous opportunity. Your two sons, Gary and Steve. When you look at like the American dream, and it's interesting, your story, like 1949, 50s, early 50s. You come to America, which is, at that point, America was kind of on a sugar high. Like the GIs came home, there was, muscle cars, milkshakes, 50s music. It was, and you go to high school, and, after everything you've been through, it had to be a shocker, like to go from, those stories to like all of a sudden middle America, where they're worried about things that seem inconsequential.
Well, I couldn't speak a word of English. So I learned, that's the only thing I'm proficient in, languages. But I met Werner in 1954. His mother and I went to Europe. He was with the military intelligence in Berlin. And we were married in Europe, honeymooned at the French Riviera.
Wow. That's had to be weird.
Yeah.
I mean, Warner, again, a patriot, right? He comes to America, his family, and then he joins the army or gets drafted and then goes back to Germany to post-World War II
because he spoke German. Otherwise, he would have been sent to Korea.
Yeah.
It was during the Korean War.
Yeah, my dad served in Korea in 1951, and that was not a good experience either at that point. Question for you. So, the Holocaust and a lot of the activity that goes on, even today, like here in Los Angeles, we have the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles. In Washington, D.C., which I live between here and Washington, D.C., they have the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And in there, it's interesting is they have a series, I've been to both, and they have the series there called The American Witness. And that's what kind of got me the idea of, it'd be great to hear your story. But a lot of it is about remembrance and trying to make sure. And then just recently, too, at the Reagan Museum, they had a big series there that focused on Auschwitz and what had happened.
We went to Auschwitz, my husband and I, on a trip to Eastern Europe. It was the most difficult thing for me.
Yeah, and I guess that's my question is, I've traveled all over the world for business, right? And so I've done a lot of work in Munich, and I would stay in Oberleiden, which is out towards Vienna, and but in the weekends, because I would spend weeks, months or two at a time away from my family. In Munich, Dachau is not too far outside of the city, and I went there to see that. And it was kind of a mixed feelings. Like it's a heaviness. It's like it's history, but it's very hard to process. But I think that part of it too is like I was taking the metro out there because the metro drops you off not too far, and I always wonder, like, people that are still living in Germany, this is there forever. It's like it's a remembrance for them. And it's interesting as I would talk to people in Germany and they're like, "Hey Troy, where are you going?" And I'm working for a German company when I'm over there, and it was kind of a mixed, and I'm sure that would be tough from their perspective.
Today's generation can't be blamed.
Yeah. Well, I think but the thing I learned, I was a mayor of a city, right? And so the thing that I learned through my research of Holocaust and, I'll say my lifetime view of trying to learn more and appreciate it is I always thought that Hitler, 33, 35, everything starts changing. But, it really, some of that started in the local municipalities where the local mayors and regional county people like wanted to get noticed and showed fealty towards the federal government, which was Nazi, and started like creating mechanisms to help the process of genocide or camps or work camps and so I like I said, I think for me it was hard to I'd always pinned it at the top and that didn't really kind of appreciate, like, it had to start in, just like in America, right? Things start at the cities, they start in towns, people rise up and they do what they're going to do. And I don't know, I guess I just thought it was very interesting.
I never been able to understand how one human being can do such atrocity to another human being.
Right. Yeah, it's
unbelievable, but it happened.
So Suzanne, if you're trying to get a message to my listeners and try to give them an idea, what would be your message that you would want to leave? And I'm so appreciative of your story and to kind of your testimony of kind of, to help put that perspective out there. But any message that you would like to leave with the listeners?
Well, you live in the most wonderful country, in the best country in the whole world. Take care of it. Go out and vote and take care of it.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is an important part of your message is to always remember what happened, right?
Yeah, never forget.
Yeah, I think these stories, the museums that are set up, as time goes by, I think it's and maybe I'm just, as I get older too, I realize like how important it is to commemorate the goods and the bads. And this is something that we've really got to kind of keep front of center so that the history doesn't repeat itself.
Well, I give credit to Germany. It's a law. They have to teach the Holocaust in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just, I think going through this process and, I will say, Suzanne, I've been very appreciative to kind of open up this perspective or this discussion again on our podcast. I think really, when it talks about the perspective of adversity, and a lot of times we have guests on that have done a lot of different really interesting things too. And, what I'm trying to do is to paint a mosaic or, a picture of America. And a big part of it is, adversity. And, adversity is relative. Some people have adversity that they, is really, really important to them. And I have a respect for that. And then adversity where, like you said, living through the Holocaust and really putting it in perspective. So I really appreciate you going through and sharing with everybody your story and your thoughts on things.
Well, I probably left out some things, but at 90, I get a little nervous.
No, you did a great job. And thank you again for having me in your home today. And
My pleasure.
It's just, it's great. Thank you. Great. Well,
thank you.
You're very welcome.
For getting the message out there.
Well, I think a lot of people will hear this and be very glad that you were on the show. Thank you again. I hope you have a great evening. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.